Good morning. My name is Ryan Engdahl. This is my video for MBA 653 Ethical Leadership. Unfortunately, I am unable to join the group on Tuesday evening, so I will post this in the discussion and share about this book that I recently read called Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I really appreciate Simon Sinek's books. He also wrote a leadership book called Start with Why that I would recommend anyone to read, and I really have been a fan of this one and would encourage anyone interested to read this one as well. So Leaders Eat Last, again, is of course a leadership book. I'll give a 10,000-foot summary here and then go into some of the specifics that I thought were the most interesting or important parts of this book for me. The book talked a little bit about descriptions of generational differences that I found to be really interesting to help conceptualize around how people of different generations behave from a leadership perspective as a result of their experience of growing up and how they developed. He spoke about, for example, the 1920s and then the following Depression, the 1930s as the Depression, World War II era, and the 50s and baby boomers. It talks about the differences where those who existed in a period of excess, the Roaring 20s or the 1950s, where resources were abundant, as compared to folks who grew up in an era like the Depression or during World War II or later generations where that experience of excess wasn't there, and how leaders result as a result of those different experiences and how they treat people and sort of conceptualize and organize leadership. So really interesting components there. The book really is focused on person-focused leadership. How do we establish teams that are strong and healthy, having to do with connections on a personal level. He talks about a circle of safety and establishing teams where successes and failures are shared and people feel safe in failing or failing forward. There's some components of science behind helping and social contact, the release of neurotransmitters and various hormones that help to support that type of behavior, the benefit of shared hardships and how teams are established, and then really how do we as leaders take this knowledge to address and establish our teams. Sort of is my favorite part of this book. The leader says we are all, or the author, we are all horribly chemically dependent, which is accurate. You know, we as humans, our emotional system functions based upon these neurotransmitters and hormones that are chemicals. The four main chemicals that he discusses in this book, though, are E, D, O, and S, endorphins, dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. And what he talks about is that these things are secreted, not just in our brains. Endorphins are hormones, so that's in your bloodstream, but they're secreted for various reasons. One is as pain relief, and then when we do something nice for somebody, that's the oxytocin and serotonin, and then when we feel good. So anytime you get a sense of feeling good about something, whether that's a success or something natural or some drug or anything, that's a dopamine release, so that's the D. But what he found is when you do something kind for somebody, if you offer help, if you pick something up that they've dropped, you get this shot of oxytocin and serotonin. And those are the things that make us feel good. And what he also found is when someone does something nice for you, you also get a shot of oxytocin and serotonin. And what they find is that the more oxytocin and serotonin you have being released and available in your brain, the more likely you are to do something nice for somebody else. And so it creates this chain, and it's a reinforcement loop. And the experience of these things encourages us to do these things for others, and then it encourages others to do nice things for other people around them. And so what you realize is that there's a natural reinforcement loop for humans that encourages pro-social behaviors, which helps to explain why we've survived as social beings and why we thrive on connection and being around each other. And I think there's some implications here, which this book was written in 2014 and then re-released in 2020 with implications for us today that we've moved to this virtual world. Because what the author suggested is that this chemical release occurs differently when we're in person or not. And he even spoke about the differences in the quality and the amount of release of neurotransmitters being different when you have an in-person connection versus a virtual connection or a person to screen. And so there's a suggestion here that the social connections, and we probably all felt this actually, I would say, in the last year and a half, that it's different for us to be connecting this way versus in person. It sort of meets the needs, but there's something that's missing from it. We get Zoom fatigue, and it's just not the same as being in person. Something interesting he spoke about is that there's a blogging organization, a group of people that exists solely online as an online community that every year has an annual convention and somewhere in Vegas or something like that where they all get together in person. And there's a tremendous amount of feedback about the benefit of being in person and shaking hands and networking and being face-to-face, which the author finds to be interesting because this is a community that exists solely online, always. So why not have an online, convention or gathering? It's because the experience of being in person results in us feeling so much differently. And so I think this has implications for us as leaders today, especially. The author talks about abstraction as a concept and establishing a circle of safety. Abstraction is sort of the physical and philosophical shifting and movement away from people towards numbers. So if people become defined as their product, or success is defined only by numbers, so if success or your teams are really more about production numbers, some staffing values or ratios, it's more difficult to establish a circle of safety. You have less of these chemical releasing interactions or feelings about people when you only see them as a number or a production value. And abstraction really is a leadership trap because it's easy to get sucked into the technical pieces of leadership and finance and production and lose sight of the people as part of that team. And what he spoke about is successful companies establish these circles of safety, where, like I said before, people are feeling connected and they're personal and comfortable to fail. And throughout the book, there's examples over and over again of companies who do this are more successful in the long haul than those who are, I would say, further abstracted and focused on outcomes more so. They talk about, there's examples in the book about treating employees like family versus pawns. One business owner that they reference quite a bit intentionally recognized employees as family members or employees like children, and said, during financial hardships or hard times at home, you don't get rid of one of your kids. You pull together and everyone makes sacrifices to help the greater good. And so an example of abstraction he would say is that large layoffs as a financial strategy are kind of the opposite of this circle of safety. Instead of pulling together and succeeding sort of all at once, you kind of cut off these numbers or these pawns to help be successful with, again, this number as goal sort of concept. Something else I thought was really important is that it talks about the benefit or the importance of shared hardships. And we know and you probably experienced this as well, is that shared struggle is the essence of humanity. I work in mental health and we see struggle and hardships all of the time. And humans are designed for struggle. That is what we do. We struggle to live, we struggle to survive, and we're much more adaptive today than we have been historically, but the nature of humans is to struggle. And so as the chemicals are released as we do this together, bonds are created, teams are built. And so as we do these things, like I say here, we're reinforced biologically by working together to solve these things. If you think back around a project that you and a team worked on, the one that comes to mind as maybe your favorite isn't the one that was smooth and easy. That's probably not even stuck in your mind, but you might really remember the one that took a lot of teamwork and struggle and grit to get solved, because of all the underlying biological things that are happening as you work together to do this. Something that struck me was the author sharing about how soldiers may report a fondness for deployments. Now, they're not saying that they liked it or felt good about combat, but what was happening as they were going through this shared struggle is that there was connection with their colleagues, team members, other soldiers, biologically underlying their experiences. And I think you see this in lots of teams. Sports teams, probably. You see it in law enforcement, firefighters. These folks who are going through things together create really strong, close-knit teams because of the biological reinforcement that's happening as a result of them going through those things together. So here's a dilemma that I think we have, and I've really been struggling with this as I've read through this book and thinking about what's best for the teams that we lead and what's best for them over time and what's best for our organizations over time. Like I said, this book was written in 2014 and then again released in 2020 prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've all raced home and our teams are, many of which are working from home. So how do we best manage teams in the work from home era? I think we have a real responsibility to our people as well as to our organizations that we are mindful about things like the biology behind team building and wellness as we do this. Many people, really, employees and employers, love the autonomy and the opportunities that are part of this remote work, virtual work, but I think there are some serious implications we might face around relationships. I mean, we've been seeing it now, and you might be experiencing some of that disconnect as you've been behind a camera and screen for the last year. But what does that mean for our teams in the future? How do we establish relationships in these circles of safety remotely if we know that there's much less or no chemicals released when we're doing this work across a screen, and that there's a significant benefit from being in person? So as a leader, how do you establish strong teams when you can't be in front of them? One of the tools that we use at my place of work is leadership rounding. We have it scheduled where we spend time meeting with our teams and employees and face-to-face, again, intentionally connecting with those biological reinforcing loops. But how do we do that if we have teams that are spread, throughout the county or country or state? If we know that what science has told us is that we'll develop stronger teams as a result of being in person, do we have a responsibility for the wellness of our employees, for our teams, and then for our customers or our patients to really be, working against, if you will, this virtual strategy that is part of business? What is the most, I would say, I suppose, ethical and appropriate model of employment so that we can ensure that we have strong and healthy teams where people feel safe and connected with their colleagues, while also supporting the benefits and the desires of people to potentially remain remote. So I haven't figured that out yet. It's something that we've been discussing recently. Leaders Eat Last is a book that I would recommend anyone to read. You get kind of sucked into it, and it becomes a quick read as a result. And I think it's really fitting, again, released in 2020 for this 2021-ish pandemic remote stuff and trying to support teams. So I would encourage any one of you to go out and check it out. Thanks.